Most people spend their entire lives chasing wealth, but very few ever stop to ask themselves the harder question: what are they actually chasing? Because here's the uncomfortable truth that nobody wants to hear: money won't fix what's broken inside you, and no amount of compounding will cure a mind that never learned to think clearly in the first place. If you're serious about building real wealth that lasts, wealth that doesn't evaporate in the next market crash or get squandered by the next generation, go ahead and subscribe now. This isn't hype. This isn't a shortcut. This is rational thinking applied over decades, and it might be the most valuable thing you hear all year. Charlie Munger spent over 9 decades on this planet watching human behavior, studying markets with obsessive attention, and observing what actually separates those who build lasting wealth from those who stumble through life wondering why success keeps slipping through their fingers like water. And what he discovered over those 9 decades might genuinely surprise you. It's not primarily about intelligence, though that helps. It's not even about education or access to information. It's about something far more fundamental, something that exists at the core of who you are: temperament. After raising 8 children and watching them grow into adults with vastly different approaches to money, lifestyle, and decision-making, Munger came to a conclusion that makes most psychologists deeply uncomfortable. Nature beats nurture. You can spend your entire adult life teaching someone about patience, about thrift, about the mathematical beauty of compound interest and disciplined decision-making, but if those qualities aren't fundamentally in their psychological wiring, you might as well be lecturing a cat about the virtues of delayed gratification. Some people are simply born prudent, hardwired for long-term thinking. Others are born to struggle financially no matter how many books they read. And the difference between these two groups has far less to do with what they learned in formal education than with how they're fundamentally wired as human beings at the deepest level. Think about this for a moment, because it's important. You've probably met someone in your life, maybe a neighbor who's lived on your street for 30 years, maybe a distant relative you see at family gatherings, maybe someone at your church or community center, who lives extraordinarily modestly by modern standards. They wear the same winter coat for 20 years until it's practically threadbare. They clip coupons religiously every Sunday morning. They buy the store brand instead of name brands without a second thought. They drive a 15-year-old car that still runs perfectly fine. And yet, if you somehow knew their full financial picture, you discover they're quietly sitting on a fortune that would make most hedge fund managers weep with envy and confusion. These people didn't need a finance degree from Harvard Business School. They didn't attend expensive weekend seminars on wealth building or follow the latest investment guru on social media. They didn't read every investment newsletter or subscribe to premium stock picking services. They came pre-installed with discipline, patience, and rational thinking. It was woven into the fabric of who they are at the most fundamental level, as natural to them as breathing. Meanwhile, their grandchildren, the second or third generation who inherited that carefully accumulated wealth, are often wandering around with diamond-encrusted watches that cost more than a year of college tuition, driving vintage cars that require constant expensive maintenance, wearing designer clothes with logos prominently displayed, thinking they're somehow clever or sophisticated because they can afford luxury items and old jewelry. But here's the brutal reality that nobody wants to acknowledge: they're not clever at all. They're not visionaries building something new. They're simply living off the prudence, the sacrifice, and the disciplined decision-making of someone who's long dead, someone who made thousands of small rational decisions over decades. They're spending capital they didn't build, benefiting from discipline they never had to practice themselves, coasting on someone else's life work. That's the funny thing about capitalism, and Munger understood this better than almost anyone who ever lived. The system rewards good genes, the genetic temperament for patience and rational thinking, just as much as it rewards good judgment and intelligent analysis. Sometimes the system even punishes both good genes and good judgment if you hand substantial wealth to people who lack both qualities. The capitalist system is fundamentally neutral. It doesn't care about your intentions, your moral character, or your family history. It simply responds to behavior over time with mathematical precision, consistently rewarding patience and rational decision-making while punishing recklessness and emotional reactivity. Let me ask you something, and I want you to really think about this question before you answer. what's the biggest financial mistake you've learned from so far in your life? What's the one decision you wish you could go back and change? Drop your answer in the comments below. I read every single one, and your experience might help someone else avoid falling into the same expensive trap. People desperately want to believe they can train themselves into becoming rational investors and thinkers. They consume dozens of books about wealth building, listen to hours of podcasts about money mindset and financial psychology, attend weekend seminars led by charismatic speakers, take online courses about investing strategies, and start genuinely thinking they're going to become the next Warren Buffett or Charlie Munger after reading 3 chapters about the power of compound interest. But that's simply not how this actually works in the real world. Rationality isn't a seminar you attend on Saturday morning and then check off your self-improvement list. It's a habit, a brutally difficult habit to build and maintain consistently, and one of the hardest patterns to establish in your entire life. You don't learn rationality once in some transformative weekend experience and suddenly have it forever. You have to become it at such a deep level that it defines how you automatically respond to uncertainty, temptation, and fear. That's precisely why most people never achieve true financial independence in their lifetimes, despite having adequate income and opportunities. They can quote the textbook definition of compound interest until they're blue in the face, explaining how money grows exponentially over time with perfect clarity. But those same people still fall for lottery tickets, spending $20 a week on statistically impossible dreams. They can explain opportunity cost in perfectly articulated sentences, discussing how every spending decision represents choosing one thing over another. But they can't skip upgrading to the newest iPhone model when their current one works perfectly fine. Human nature, that deep, ancient, emotional wiring, always beats logic and rational analysis in the short run. Always. Every single time without exception. And the short run is precisely where most people live their entire lives, trapped in a cycle of immediate gratification that feels satisfying today but systematically destroys their financial future one small decision at a time. When people used to approach Charlie Munger at Berkshire Hathaway shareholder meetings or other public events and ask him directly what the secret to building real lasting wealth was, he'd usually say something disarmingly simple and direct: don't be stupid. Just avoid doing obviously stupid things consistently over long periods. But the truth underneath that deceptively simple statement is far more uncomfortable than most people want to hear or accept. Most people genuinely can't help being financially stupid in systematic ways. It's not a character flaw or moral failing. They're simply hardwired through millions of years of evolution for immediate gratification and short-term survival thinking. The very idea of patiently waiting 10 full years for a meaningful financial payoff makes them physically uncomfortable, like an itch they desperately need to scratch. Their brain literally produces discomfort chemicals when forced to delay gratification. And Wall Street, those massive financial institutions with their armies of psychologists and marketing experts, knows this aspect of human nature better than anyone. That's precisely why they sell action and activity rather than patience. They package excitement as opportunity, movement as progress, complexity as sophistication. They've learned that most people would rather lose money actively than make money passively because activity feels like progress even when it's destroying value. The financial industry makes billions annually exploiting this fundamental quirk of human psychology. Meanwhile, that old woman with the threadbare coat who quietly and patiently accumulated 4,000 Berkshire Hathaway A shares over several decades, representing over $2 billion depending on when you're counting, just keeps compounding steadily in the corner of her modest home. She's boring by every modern standard and cultural metric. She's not on social media sharing her investment wisdom. She's not giving TED Talks about her philosophy. She's not writing books or starting a podcast. She doesn't appear on CNBC or Bloomberg to share her thoughts on market conditions. She's just sitting there in her paid-off house, letting arithmetic do what arithmetic always does when you give it enough time and crucially don't interfere with the process through constant trading or emotional decisions. And arithmetic, unlike human emotion and ego, never lies to you or tries to make you feel inadequate. You simply cannot teach that kind of deep temperamental patience in any classroom or seminar. You can only recognize it when you see it in someone, and then do everything possible to protect it from the thousand daily temptations and distractions that the modern world throws at anyone with a functioning bank account and internet connection. That's what Buffett and Munger built Berkshire Hathaway around, a fundamental recognition that certain people think long-term by basic nature and temperament, not by instruction or willpower. Their shareholders aren't day traders frantically chasing the next hot stock tip on Reddit forums. They're the kind of people who would genuinely rather watch paint dry than chase the latest market bubble, no matter how much excitement everyone else seems to be having or how much they're supposedly missing out on. And here's what most investors and regular people completely miss about markets and wealth building: that basic patience becomes a genuine competitive advantage, a source of actual alpha returns, when everyone around you is behaving emotionally. When the crowd is panicking during market crashes or euphoric during bubbles, someone who can simply remain calm and rational gains an enormous edge that money cannot buy and competitors cannot easily replicate. Patience literally becomes a form of arbitrage in markets dominated by emotional decision-making and short-term thinking. Now, let's not romanticize delayed gratification either, because Munger never did and was always brutally honest about its limits. Some people take financial discipline and frugality way too far in the opposite direction. They save so aggressively and deny themselves so completely that they forget to actually live and experience life. They hoard joy and meaningful experiences the way misers hoard coins in fairy tales, always waiting for some mythical better time that never quite arrives. Munger had a specific term for this pathological behavior. He called it financial anorexia. It's not genuine prudence anymore at that extreme, it's a pathology, a mental disorder disguised as financial responsibility and virtue. He once told someone point-blank in his characteristically direct way, "If you save every single dime you earn and die with a massive fortune but absolutely no meaningful memories, no experiences worth remembering, no joy along the way, you've simply donated your entire life to compounding mathematics. You've optimized a spreadsheet while missing actual life. And you fundamentally can't compound time the way you compound money. Time doesn't work that way no matter how much you wish it did. You can only waste it through inaction or use it through meaningful experiences and relationships. Those are your only two options, and unlike money in a bank account, you never get more time no matter how well you invest what you already have." So yes, Munger believed deeply in saving and building capital, but emphatically not in self-denial for its own sake or as some moral virtue. Throughout his long life, he spent roughly 2 or 3 cents out of every dollar he earned and saved the rest consistently. That particular ratio worked perfectly for him across many decades. He never needed much materially to feel genuinely content and satisfied with life. And that reveals something profound about happiness and wealth. The real trick in building a satisfying life isn't figuring out how much you can manage to save through extreme discipline. It's figuring out how little you actually need to be genuinely happy and content. Because when your expectations are reasonable and properly aligned with reality rather than media-driven fantasy, the whole world suddenly looks affordable and accessible. You're not constantly feeling behind or deprived. You're not measuring yourself against impossible standards. You're just living well within your means and feeling perfectly fine about it. But here's where nature comes roaring back into the equation with full force. Even if someone sits you down and explains all of this clearly and logically with perfect examples, even if you intellectually understand everything about patience and compound interest and rational behavior, half the audience still won't actually do it in practice. Some people simply cannot stand inactivity and quiet patience. It's not a choice or moral failing. They're wired differently. They would rather feel busy losing money than feel lazy making it, because activity and motion feel like progress even when they're actively destroying financial value. That's human nature operating at its most fundamental evolutionary level. We evolved over millions of years to hunt, to gather, to move constantly, to respond to immediate threats. Sitting on cash or patiently waiting 10 full years for a stock position to play out feels like death to most people. Their ancient brain interprets inactivity as danger. They crave movement and stimulation even when it systematically kills them financially. Before we go any further into Munger's wisdom, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. This kind of clear, rational thinking about money and life doesn't come around often, and you'll definitely want to catch future lessons. I promise you, no hype, no shortcuts, no nonsense, just rational wisdom from someone who actually lived these principles successfully for 9 decades. That's precisely why financial markets never run out of noise and distraction. Every single era produces a new shiny object for people to chase, a new, sure thing, that's supposedly different this time. In the late 90s, it was dot-com stocks with zero revenue but exciting PowerPoint presentations about the future. In the mid-2000s, it was subprime mortgages packaged as safe investments with AAA ratings. More recently, it's been cryptocurrencies promising to revolutionize everything, meme stocks driven by social media hype, SPACs that turned out to be vehicles for transferring wealth from retail investors to insiders, and whatever other flavor of the week speculation happens to be trending on social media this particular month. The specific technology changes constantly. The underlying psychology remains absolutely identical. You can replace old-fashioned roulette tables with sophisticated algorithms and blockchain technology, but the fundamental impulse behind both is exactly the same: the desperate human need for stimulation, the craving for something exciting to happen right now, the inability to tolerate boredom and patience. And that's precisely why genuine patience will always be rare in financial markets, regardless of how much information becomes available or how sophisticated analytical tools become. Patience isn't taught in business schools because you can't really teach it in any meaningful way. It's inherited through basic temperament, reinforced through painful experiences, and tested constantly by a world that profits enormously from your impatience and emotional reactions. People love debating nature versus nurture as if one completely cancels out the other, as if proving one side right means the other side is totally wrong. But the truth that Munger understood through decades of observation is more nuanced: nurture only works to improve behavior when nature allows it. If you were born with an impulsive temperament, you can certainly improve with conscious effort, systems, and behavioral tricks. But you'll always be fighting psychological gravity. You'll always be swimming against your natural current. And gravity, as anyone who's seriously tried to diet consistently or save money against their natural inclinations knows, usually wins in the end. The default behavior reasserts itself over time unless you maintain constant vigilance. The best investors Munger knew throughout his 9 decades weren't necessarily the smartest people in the room by raw IQ measures. They weren't always the ones with the most prestigious degrees or the most sophisticated analytical frameworks. They were the calmest people. They possessed a temperament that didn't require constant external validation or excitement. They were genuinely willing to look stupid and out of touch for an entire decade, to be mocked at cocktail parties for missing the latest hot trend, if it meant being proven right in the end. And they usually were proven right eventually, because financial markets punish impatience far more severely and consistently than they punish ignorance or lack of information. So what's the practical lesson here for someone in their 40s, 50s, or 60s who's trying to build real lasting wealth before retirement, who's maybe made some financial mistakes along the way and wants to course correct before it's too late? First and most importantly, if you're naturally impatient by temperament, at least have the self-awareness and honesty to know it about yourself. Don't pretend you'll suddenly transform into Benjamin Graham or Warren Buffett by next Monday morning after reading one popular investment book. That's fantasy, not planning. Instead, design practical systems around your known weakness. Automate your retirement contributions directly from your paycheck so you never see the money or face the temptation to spend it. Avoid speculative investments entirely because you know from past experience that you'll panic and sell at exactly the worst possible moment. Stop pretending you have a temperament you clearly don't possess and never will. On the other hand, if you're naturally prudent and patient by temperament, guard that rare psychological trait like gold, because the entire modern world will conspire daily to talk you out of it. Every advertisement you see is psychologically engineered to create dissatisfaction. Every financial news headline is designed to create urgency and FOMO. Every social media influencer is specifically trying to make you feel behind, to convince you that everyone else is getting rich quickly while you're being left in the dust missing out on obvious opportunities. Don't buy into any of it. Remember that quiet woman with 4,000 Berkshire A shares that Munger described? She didn't chase trends or hot tips. She didn't need applause or validation from strangers on the internet. She didn't measure her success by comparing herself to others. She just sat quietly and patiently in her modest home, letting arithmetic do the heavy lifting over decades. And arithmetic, unlike emotion and social comparison and ego, never lies to you or makes you feel inadequate. That's both the beauty and the cruelty of human nature when it intersects with money and markets. The patient few will always look foolish and out of touch in the beginning stages of any market cycle or trend. They'll be mocked for being too conservative. They'll be told they're missing out on obvious opportunities. They'll watch others appear to get rich quickly while they sit on the sidelines. But when the noise eventually fades and the market charts crash back to fundamental reality, when the tide goes out and reveals who's been swimming naked, they'll still be standing with their capital intact and their peace of mind preserved. Everyone else will be out desperately looking for the next sure thing, the next can't-miss opportunity that will help them recover their losses. And they'll find it, of course, because there's always another one waiting for them, priced just expensively enough to teach them the same painful lesson all over again in an endless cycle. People absolutely love preaching the gospel of delayed gratification with an almost religious fervor and moral superiority. Save now, enjoy later. Sacrifice today for a better tomorrow. Deny yourself now for future rewards. It sounds noble, disciplined, almost holy in its purity and self-denial. But if you examine this philosophy closely and honestly, you'll notice that most people preaching it don't actually know what later means in practical, specific terms. Later becomes someday. Someday becomes eventually. Eventually becomes never. And before you know it, before you've had time to realize what happened, the diligent saver is gone from this world, and the compounding has stopped permanently. Not because the mathematics failed, math always works exactly as advertised, but because biology failed. Human mortality doesn't care about your carefully constructed spreadsheet projections or your retirement calculators. Munger wasn't saying patience is bad or that delayed gratification doesn't work. Far from it. Patience is absolutely the cornerstone of intelli-ing that ruins most good investment ideas before they even have a chance to compound over time. They weren't trying to be rebels or contrarians for the sake of being different. They were just trying to be fundamentally sane in an industry that had gone collectively insane. And in a world addicted to unnecessary complexity, impressive-sounding jargon, and constant activity, basic sanity and simplicity look absolutely radical and strange. People constantly ask them over the decades, what's the Berkshire secret? What's the magic formula? There isn't one magic formula or secret sauce. They simply avoid stupidity longer and more consistently than most people can stay disciplined. That's it. That's the whole secret. They don't chase quarterly earnings numbers that look good in press releases but destroy long-term value. They don't hold board meetings every week to discuss irrelevant trivia and create the illusion of activity. They don't issue press releases bragging about decisions that should be completely obvious to anyone thinking rationally. Their entire philosophy is almost boring in its simplicity, and that's precisely why it works decade after decade while flashier competitors flame out. Most large corporations operate like medieval royal courts with complex hierarchies and political intrigue. Everyone desperately wants to look important and indispensable. They speak in meaningless jargon to sound sophisticated. They hide behind committees to avoid personal accountability for decisions. They generate endless paperwork and presentations that accomplish nothing of real value. That's why nothing truly innovative or valuable ever gets done efficiently in those environments. At Berkshire, there's simply no room for that theatrical nonsense. There's no strategic synergy committee or innovation department staffed with people whose actual job descriptions nobody can quite explain clearly. If you want something accomplished, you pick up the phone, talk directly to Warren, and use your brain. No 70-slide PowerPoint presentations. No consulting speak buzzwords. No expensive consultants charging $500,000 to tell you what common sense and basic arithmetic already know for free. Their reputation, carefully built over 6 full decades of consistent behavior, allows them to do things that would take other companies months or years of complex negotiation. Someone can call Warren on a Friday night with a problem or opportunity, and by Sunday afternoon Berkshire has committed $10 billion. No armies of lawyers arguing over contract language. No circus of approvals through multiple committees. No endless due diligence that kills deals. Why can they move that extraordinarily fast with that much capital at stake? Because when Berkshire says yes to something, when Warren or Charlie give their word, it's as absolutely binding as a signed contract notarized in blood. That's the kind of reputation money genuinely cannot buy and competitors cannot copy no matter how hard they try or how much they spend on public relations. Tell me in the comments, and really think about this, what principle from this entire lesson will you actually apply starting today? What's the one concrete change you're going to make in how you think about money, time, or happiness? I want to know. When the world inevitably goes to hell in a handbasket, and it does so regularly, roughly once per decade with depressing predictability throughout history, you want to be holding substantial cash and thinking clearly while everyone else panics. Munger didn't say that as poetry or motivational speaking. He said it as cold arithmetic, because when genuine panic sets in and spreads through markets, basic mathematics becomes a form of morality. And most people catastrophically fail both the math and the morality when tested under pressure. Berkshire Hathaway spent 6 full decades preparing for the inevitable day when everyone else loses their minds simultaneously. They don't know exactly when the next crisis is coming or what will trigger it. They just know with absolute certainty that it will come eventually, because history guarantees it with depressing regularity going back centuries. Markets eternally swing between two primal emotions, greed and fear. There's no third option. Berkshire's entire strategy is simply remaining sober and rational while everyone else gets drunk on one emotion or the other. That discipline alone, just staying sane when others go temporarily insane, has made them extraordinarily wealthy. During the 2008 financial crisis, when major financial institutions and corporations were collapsing faster than journalists could spell bankruptcy, when the entire global financial system seemed on the verge of complete collapse, Berkshire didn't panic or freeze up. They wrote billion-dollar checks while the supposedly smartest people on Wall Street, people with prestigious degrees and decades of experience, were literally hiding under their desks afraid to answer their phones. Not because Munger and Buffett were fearless in some superhuman way, fear is actually a completely rational response to genuine danger, but because they'd already accepted fear as a normal part of the investing process decades earlier. You don't rise above panic through some superhuman effort of will. You plan for it rationally and systematically when your mind is still clear and markets are calm. That's why they always hold substantial cash reserves on the balance sheet, not as some fetish or because they can't find good opportunities, but specifically as firepower for when opportunities become obvious. Cash gives you optionality. Optionality gives you calm. And calm gives you clarity to think rationally when everyone else is losing their minds and making catastrophically bad decisions under extreme pressure. The average investor absolutely hates holding cash because it doesn't earn anything meaningful in a low-rate environment. Every day it just sits there earning essentially nothing. Feels like losing to inflation, like missing out on gains. They forget that cash earns the single most important thing in investing, survival. Cash is what allows you to stay in the game when others are forced out. It's what allows you to play offense when others are too busy cleaning up their own financial wreckage and trying to meet margin calls. People fundamentally misunderstand what Munger and Buffett mean by being prepared for crises. It's not about predicting the next crash with perfect timing. Nobody can do that consistently, and anyone who claims they can is either delusional or lying. It's about deserving to survive the crash when it inevitably comes. You can't time disasters with precision, but you can absolutely build a financial system that doesn't collapse under pressure. That's Berkshire in a nutshell. Simple, sturdy, and completely unleveraged. They like to say they sleep well at night, not because they're lucky or because bad things never happen to them, but because they've already mentally rehearsed the nightmare scenarios and know they'll survive them. In every major financial crisis throughout history, you'll see two distinct types of people emerge. The overextended and the undisciplined. One group borrowed too much, using leverage to amplify returns without considering the amplification of losses. The other group believed too much in their own intelligence or in the permanent continuation of good times. They both end up in the same place eventually, broke, confused, and wondering what happened. Meanwhile, the boring person who kept substantial powder dry, who avoided leverage, who stayed rational when everyone else was getting euphoric, walks in calmly and buys their distressed assets for pennies on the dollar. From the outside, that person looks like a genius with perfect timing. They're not a genius. They're just not stupid. They simply avoided doing obviously stupid things for long enough. Munger remembered vividly when a young analyst once asked him earnestly, "How do you personally stay calm during a market crash when everything is falling apart?" He gave an answer that perfectly captured his philosophy: you don't stay calm in the moment. That's not how it works. You plan while you're calm, when markets are stable and you can think clearly, so you don't have to improvise while you're terrified and your amygdala is screaming at you to do something immediately. That's the whole trick. You win by thinking clearly when it still feels unnecessary, when everyone else thinks you're being too conservative. Because when clarity finally matters, when the crisis has actually arrived and everyone realizes they should have prepared, it's already far too late for most people to position themselves properly. The life rafts are already full. The exits are blocked. The damage is done. Berkshire's reputation, their substantial cash position, and their temperamental patience, these three elements tie together into a coherent system. They're the three legs of their survival stool. Remove any one and the entire system tips over and fails. Reputation brings them deals that others never see. Cash allows them to act decisively when those deals appear. Patience lets them wait calmly until the odds are finally tilted overwhelmingly in their favor. That specific combination, rare in financial markets, turns chaos and crisis into extraordinary opportunity rather than catastrophe. The truth is that panic reveals character faster and more accurately than prosperity ever could. When the tide goes out, as Buffett famously said, you find out who's been swimming naked. And in some particularly entertaining cases, you discover who's been stealing the swimsuits from those who were at least trying to be prepared. Every single time there's a market frenzy and bubble, people act like the fundamental laws of financial gravity have been permanently repealed by some new technology or paradigm. And every single time, without exception, gravity wins in the end. Markets always reward discipline eventually and always punish delusion consistently. It just takes time for the punishment to be delivered, and in the interim the delusional people appear to be winning. During 1973 and 1974, one of the worst bear markets in American history, Munger watched investors sell wonderful businesses at half their intrinsic value, sometimes even less, simply because they were scared of continued losses. They weren't thinking rationally or analytically. They were reacting emotionally to pain and fear. Fear does that to human cognition. It compresses IQ faster than alcohol, making smart people temporarily stupid. The irony that Munger appreciated is that those moments of collective stupidity and irrational panic are precisely when the biggest fortunes are built by the small minority of people who aren't participating in the mass hysteria. That's what Berkshire specifically trains for and positions itself for, to sit still and think clearly while the world hyperventilates around them. It's not glamorous or exciting, but it's extraordinarily profitable over time. And here's the paradox that Munger observed repeatedly: everyone says confidently that they'll be brave when the market crashes. They imagine themselves being the calm rational buyer when others panic. They won't be. They'll panic exactly like everyone else because they never actually built the temperament and systems to handle being deeply uncomfortable. They mistake optimism for resilience. They confuse talking about courage with possessing it. Resilience isn't smiling through pain or pretending everything is fine. It's continuing to function effectively through pain. It's writing large checks while others are writing obituaries for capitalism. It's keeping your head clear and your thinking rational when every headline screams apocalypse and the end of the world. That's what Berkshire does better than almost any organization, they don't root for chaos or wish for crashes, but they're completely ready for chaos when it inevitably arrives. That readiness comes from decades of not lying to themselves about reality. They admit honestly that fear is part of the game, that losses happen to everyone, and that the future will always surprise you in ways you didn't anticipate. And because they accept those uncomfortable truths fully, they don't have to panic when those truths arrive at their doorstep. That's rationality practiced consistently over decades. Not emotionless like a robot, just psychologically balanced and prepared. So when people ask Munger directly, "Charlie, what happens if the world goes to hell?" And people asked him this many times, he would tell them calmly, "Then you'll be in good company at Berkshire, because we've been there before in multiple crises. We've made money there before during crashes, and we'll do it again calmly, quietly, without drama or panic." That's what real survival looks like in business. Prepared, patient, properly capitalized, and slightly amused by everyone else's predictable hysteria and overreaction. The world will always go temporarily mad from time to time. That's guaranteed by human psychology. But it will also always eventually come back to arithmetic and fundamental value. And arithmetic never panics. Math doesn't have emotions. Numbers don't care about headlines. Munger recently got invited to something he found darkly amusing, a Bitcoin happy hour, a celebratory gathering of cryptocurrency enthusiasts. Imagine that for a moment. A bunch of people getting together specifically to celebrate volatility and speculation. They said it would be fun and educational. He said he already knew exactly how it would end, just like every other speculative mania in human history going back to tulip bulbs in Holland. The only thing genuinely new about Bitcoin is the marketing and technology wrapper. The underlying stupidity is ancient and unchanging. Now, don't misunderstand Munger's position. He wasn't reflexively against innovation or new technology. He was against illusion and delusion masquerading as innovation. There's a critical difference. Real innovation creates genuine value for society. Delusion just creates volatility and transfers wealth from the gullible to the clever. And most of what gets enthusiastically sold as groundbreaking financial innovation is just a complicated way to separate fools from their money using new terminology. Munger once joked that the Bitcoin crowd reminds him of a religion that worships Judas Iscariot. They glorify betrayal, betrayal of reason, of mathematics, of common sense, of everything that actually works. They preach decentralization and freedom, but their real god is simple greed dressed up in ideological clothing. They don't genuinely want a better financial system. They want a faster casino with better marketing. And Wall Street, ever opportunistic, was delighted to build it for them, complete with ETFs, social media influencers, and overpriced conferences full of self-proclaimed visionaries selling tickets to what's essentially the next tulip festival. Munger had been alive long enough to recognize this pattern with absolute clarity. Every single generation thinks it's invented the shortcut to wealth, the hack that previous generations somehow missed. And every single generation learns painfully that the fundamental laws of economics don't care about your enthusiasm or your technology. In the 1950s on his honeymoon, Munger stopped in Las Vegas. Back then, casinos were elegant, men in tuxedos, women in evening dresses, everyone looking sophisticated and intelligent until they opened their wallets and started gambling. They came thousands of miles specifically to do something they knew intellectually was mathematically dumb. They weren't stupid in theory or in other areas of life. They were deliberately stupid in practice at the casino. That's Bitcoin in a nutshell: well-dressed, articulate people doing fundamentally dumb things with impressive confidence. The human brain is wired by evolution to love the idea of something for nothing. We evolved to chase quick rewards rather than slow ones because in the ancestral environment, slow rewards often never arrived. That's why people gamble, speculate wildly, and trade digital nonsense at 2 in the morning on their phones. They call it investing to make themselves feel sophisticated. But it's not investing by any reasonable definition. It's entertainment with worse odds than Las Vegas, dressed up in technological complexity. Real investing is buying productive assets that generate cash flow over time, businesses that make products people want, that solve real problems, that have sustainable competitive advantages. Speculating is buying hope and narrative and calling it technology or the future. If you don't know the fundamental difference between these two activities, the market will teach it to you expensively through painful losses. People would tell Munger, "Charlie, you just don't understand blockchain technology." And he'd respond that he also doesn't understand astrology, and it seems to work about as well for predicting the future. Whenever someone has to explain why an idea is supposedly brilliant using 20 buzzwords and zero cash flow analysis, you can safely assume it's nonsense wrapped in complexity. In Munger's world, the test is brutally simple: does it produce anything of value? Does it serve a genuine need? Can it survive without constantly recruiting new believers and new money? If the answer is no to those questions, congratulations, you found a cult or a Ponzi scheme, not a company or an investment. Munger watched investment fads come and go like seasons over 9 decades. The dot-com bubble, where companies with no revenue somehow had billion-dollar valuations. The housing bubble, where people bought homes they couldn't afford with loans they didn't understand. The SPAC bubble, where companies went public through reverse mergers to avoid scrutiny. The crypto bubble, where digital tokens with no intrinsic value commanded trillions in collective faith. Same music, just new instruments. The melody never actually changes. People start with, "This time is different." Then comes, "Everyone's getting rich except me." Then, "It's too big to fail now." And finally, after the collapse, no one could have seen this coming. Every single time, Munger would laugh quietly, because he saw it coming. Everyone paying attention saw it coming. People just didn't want to believe it because they were making money and felt smart. Bitcoin, in particular, fascinated Munger not as an investment, he wouldn't touch it, but as a psychological experiment in mass delusion. It proves that humans would rather believe in magic than arithmetic. A digital token with no intrinsic value, no regulatory anchor, no productive output, and yet it commands trillions in collective faith and speculation. That's not finance or investment. That's mass hypnosis on a global scale. And like every hypnosis act, the magic ends abruptly the moment people wake up and start asking basic questions about value. Munger was old enough to remember when speculation was considered a dirty word, something done in dark corners. Now it's a respectable business model taught in universities. We've financialized dopamine itself. Every time your phone pings with a price alert, it's literally a slot machine disguised as progress and technology. And make no mistake, the house always wins in this game. The exchanges, the promoters, the platforms, they all make enormous money whether you do or not. You are the product being sold. You just don't realize it until the music stops and you're left holding worthless tokens. People would ask Munger, "But Charlie, what if you're wrong? What if Bitcoin really does change the world and you missed it?" He'd respond, "Then I'll happily admit I was wrong from the comfort of my portfolio full of productive businesses that generate cash while others chase digital illusions." You don't have to swing at every pitch in life, especially not the ones thrown by carnival barkers in digital costumes. The goal isn't to be trendy or to participate in every new thing. The goal is to stay solvent and rational. There's deep irony here that Munger appreciated. Bitcoin was supposedly created as a rebellion against the traditional financial system, against banks and government control. And yet it became the system's favorite distraction. While people were busy trading imaginary coins and arguing about blockchain on social media, the real businesses, the ones that make things, sell things, and build things, quietly got richer and stronger. That's how capitalism always wins. It rewards the doers while the dreamers argue about definitions and paradigm shifts. Munger often said that the biggest risk to your wealth isn't inflation, taxation, or government regulation. It's your own stupidity, especially the stupid decisions you make when you're feeling left out or greedy. And Bitcoin, in his considered view, is stupidity weaponized by sophisticated marketing. It's a shiny object specifically designed to make you forget that real value in the end must be earned through productivity. Not mined with computers, not minted through clever code, but earned through discipline, patience, and rational behavior, all the things that speculators find boring and outdated. So when someone tells you they're a crypto millionaire and tries to make you feel stupid for not participating, Munger's advice would be, smile politely, congratulate them on their paper gains, and then wait patiently. Time is the great auditor. And it never misses a fraud or a delusion. Numbers eventually tell the truth. After 9 full decades on this planet, after building enormous wealth, after watching countless market cycles and human dramas, Munger learned something that should be obvious but somehow isn't. The goal isn't to be rich by some arbitrary numerical measure. The real goal is to stay rational long enough to live well. Because wealth without sense is just delayed misery, and sense without some joy isn't worth living for. That delicate balance between discipline and delight, between prudence and pleasure, is where real intelligence hides. People often assumed incorrectly that Munger lived a life of grinding sacrifice, that he denied himself every pleasure to chase compounding returns obsessively. They're completely wrong about this. He didn't sacrifice joy. He optimized intelligently for sustainable satisfaction. He enjoyed life within reasonable boundaries. He let compounding do the heavy lifting financially so he didn't have to live in constant anxiety about money. That's what most people entirely miss about his philosophy. Rational living isn't about being joyless or austere. It's about building a life where joy doesn't bankrupt you, where pleasure doesn't systematically destroy your future. Some people live like they'll never die, spending recklessly with no thought for tomorrow. Others live like they're dying tomorrow, hoarding everything and experiencing nothing. Both approaches are foolish in different ways. The first group never enjoys what they've earned because they never earn enough to feel secure. The second group never earns what they enjoy because they're too afraid to spend anything. Wisdom lives somewhere in the middle ground where prudence funds freedom and freedom doesn't destroy prudence. Rational joy, as Munger understood it, means being genuinely content without being complacent about improvement. It means being disciplined without being dull. It means being generous without being gullible. It's the middle path between reckless excess and paralyzing fear, and it's the only approach that genuinely scales well with age and changing circumstances. When Munger was younger, he thought success would feel like victory, like winning some competition. It doesn't feel that way at all. It feels more like quiet relief from surviving your own mistakes long enough to see the world eventually prove you right about the fundamentals. And if you've done that with your integrity intact and your relationships preserved, you've already won the only game that truly matters. People think legacy is about buildings with your name on them and headlines about your wealth. Munger thought very differently. He believed legacy is about habits and thinking patterns that outlive you. If you've taught even one person to think more clearly, to save more wisely, to stay calm in chaos, you've done more lasting good than most politicians and self-help gurus combined. Because clear thinking spreads quietly through example, but it compounds loudly across generations, just like capital does. That's the legacy Munger cared about, not worship or fame, but teaching a few people to learn from his mistakes faster than he learned from them himself. So if there's one overarching lesson from all of this, from the philosophy about saving and spending, from surviving crises, from avoiding speculation like Bitcoin, from building something like Berkshire, it's this: be rational long enough to deserve a peaceful life. Not a flashy life that impresses strangers at cocktail parties. Not a perfect life that exists only in Instagram posts. A genuinely peaceful life. Because in the end, peace of mind is what money was supposed to buy you all along. Everything else is just scorekeeping and status games. And if you can reach that point of genuine peace, where you have enough, where you know you have enough, where you don't need external validation, congratulations. You've mastered the only game that actually matters in life. The world will keep insisting that you need more, that you're falling behind, that happiness requires the next purchase or the next achievement. Ignore all of it. Build your life around rational principles. Avoid obvious stupidity. Be patient when others panic. Be cautious when others are greedy. Spend less than you earn. Invest in productive assets. Maintain your integrity. Preserve your relationships. And remember that time compounds too, just in the opposite direction from money. You're getting older, not younger. You have less energy ahead, not more. Your curiosity will naturally shrink unless you actively fight it. Your health will decline regardless of your wealth. So yes, save intelligently and build capital. But also live while you can actually enjoy living. Buy the experience that creates memories. Take the trip with people you love. Order the good wine occasionally without guilt. You're not a monk taking a vow of poverty. You're a human being trying to live wisely in a world that's constantly trying to make you stupid. Charlie Munger spent 99 years figuring this out through trial and error, through mistakes and successes, through boom times and crashes. He handed us the blueprint. The question now is whether we're rational enough to follow it, patient enough to stick with it, and wise enough to know when enough is truly enough. That's the test. And unlike the market, you can't cheat on this test. You either pass by living well, or you fail by dying rich but empty. The choice, as always, has been yours all along.